Right before the cameras began rolling, a staffer hurried over to Jeff Van Drew and slipped a note into his hand. It carried one short warning: do not let her bring up the timeline. But the moment the hearing officially commenced, Jasmine Crockett already had that very timeline laid neatly on the desk in front of her. What unfolded after that point was never meant to be seen outside the committee room. Stay with me till the final line. Because what really went down behind those polished oak desks was far more explosive than anyone had anticipated. Before we get into how Jasmine Crockett ended up cornering a sitting congressman with a document bearing his own signature, make sure you're tuned in, because this story deals with sealed files, contractor scandals, and a confrontation so heated the chairman had no option but to slam his gavel and announce an immediate recess. The House Judiciary Committee chamber has hosted its share of political drama over the years. Impeachment hearings, tense Supreme Court confirmation clashes, constitutional battles that end up etched into the national record. But most oversight hearings, they're procedural, dry, the type of bureaucratic formality that shapes the real world but rarely ever captures the public's attention. Today's session was supposed to fall firmly into that category: a routine review of ICE enforcement protocols and federal detention center conditions. The witness list featured mid-tier officials, policy analysts, and representatives from advocacy groups. Nothing that suggested fireworks. Nothing that hinted at viral moments or headlines. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing by the usual script. She'd spent the previous week doing something most lawmakers don't do for hearings like this: actual ground-level investigation, reading through stacks of documents nobody thought mattered. Years in the legal field had taught her the truth: most of the real evidence hides in paperwork that people assume no one will ever check. The footnotes, the attachments, the obscure administrative logs, and buried deep in those files, she found something extraordinary: a full ICE abuse and oversight report, one that had been required by law to reach Congress 6 months earlier. Not only had it been fully completed and signed off on, it had been deliberately tucked away inside a restricted archive where the Oversight Committee couldn't access it without special clearance. Its findings were damning. The report detailed systemic failures across multiple detention facilities in 3 states: inadequate medical care, overuse of solitary confinement, suspicious contractor billing practices, and, most disturbing of all, several substantiated claims of abuse that had never been addressed. It was precisely the kind of document Congress was supposed to receive. Instead, someone hid it. But here's where things became especially interesting: the signature page among the officials who had reviewed and approved the findings was none other than Congressman Jeff Van Drew, who now sat on the Judiciary Committee, loudly insisting that ICE abuse allegations were exaggerated partisan talking points. His political identity had shifted dramatically after he changed parties, and he'd built his new persona on being one of the toughest voices on immigration enforcement. Yet there it was, his name, his handwritten signature, page 17, a certification, proclaiming that he had reviewed the findings and recommended corrective action. Now, 18 months later, he was publicly arguing these problems didn't exist. He repeated it in hearings, television interviews, and press statements, hoping, it seemed, that nobody would dig up the one document he personally approved that told a very different story. But Jasmine Crockett had dug it up, and she walked into the hearing ready to make him confront it. The session began without incident. Chairman Jim Jordan spoke about the importance of oversight while standing behind law enforcement agencies. Ranking Member Jerry Nadler countered with remarks on balancing national security with basic human rights. The first witness droned through carefully worded non-answers. It was the kind of background noise that fills most government hearings. Then Crockett got her 5-minute sand, everything changed. She opened with a question that sounded harmless enough. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask our ICE representative about the status of the comprehensive facility review completed in March of last year. Did that review identify any systemic issues that required our attention?" The ICE official blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not certain which specific review you mean, Congresswoman. We conduct many assessments. The March 24th Joint Agency Task Force Review," she clarified without missing a beat, reading from the document. "The one covering facilities in Texas, Arizona, and California. The one that was legally required to come before this committee, but never did. That one? Do you know it?" The official shifted in his seat. "I'd have to check our internal. Allow me," Crockett cut in smoothly. "Because I have the executive summary right here, and frankly, it's alarming." She read out the findings one by one. 70% of facilities lacking adequate medical staff, millions in unexplained contractor payments, multiple verified abuse allegations buried without follow-up. "So," she asked, "why was this report never delivered to Congress?" The room changed instantly. Reporters stopped typing. Members leaned forward, and Jeff Van Drew, 3 seats away, suddenly looked like a man who felt the ground shifting beneath him. The ICE official tried to dodge, but Crockett was already pulling out a thicker folder. "I can show you the full report," she said, "along with the administrative logs documenting who reviewed it, who signed it, and who decided to classify it as restricted rather than submit it here." Then she turned her gaze on Van Drew. "Congressman Van Drew, you served on the Oversight Board during that time, didn't you?" Van Drew tried to keep his composure. "I reviewed many documents. This isn't many documents," she said sharply. "This is the document. And unless your signature was forged, you reviewed and certified its findings." She held up the page so cameras could zoom in. "That's your signature on page 17, isn't it?" The room erupted in whispers. Van Drew's face tightened. "I would need context." "The context," Crockett shot back, "is that you acknowledged these serious problems. Then you spent more than a year claiming they didn't exist. And that was when the unexpected happened." A young staffer rushed forward, practically stumbling, and handed Van Drew a folded note. He opened it quickly, and his expression somehow worsened. Members noticed. Reporters noticed. Crockett noticed. She smiled. "Congressman, did your staff just advise you on how to answer? Because I'm struggling to understand how you plan to explain signing a report documenting abuse, financial irregularities, and mismanagement, then pretending those issues were imaginary." Van Drew attempted a counterattack. "The Congresswoman is oversimplifying a very complex. I'm reading your signature." "Congressman," she snapped, "there's nothing complex about that. And here's more." She lifted another sheet. "You personally approved the section stating that contractor oversight was inadequate and recommended deeper investigation. So tell us, why didn't you pursue that investigation when you joined Congress? Why didn't you mention it even once? Why did you instead become one of the loudest offenders of these exact contractors?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, which is exactly what it was. Van Drew looked like he was waiting to formulate a response. That wouldn't make things worse. But Crockett wasn't done. "Let me tell you what I think happened," she continued, her tone shifting from prosecutorial to explanatory, like a lawyer laying out a case for a jury. "I think you reviewed this report. You saw that it documented serious problems, and you did what you were supposed to do. You signed off on it and recommended action. But then something changed. Maybe you decided you wanted to switch parties and needed toastable conservative credentials. Maybe you realized that being tough on immigration was going to be your ticket out, staying in office after you switched. Or maybe, and this is what really concerns me, you were approached by people with financial interests in THESO detention facilities and convinced Thesis's report needed to disappear. Vander tried to interrupt. That's a serious allegation without any. It's a question, not an allegation, Crockett corrected. But since you bring it up, let's talk about your campaign contributions. Since AO switched parties and took Fischerline pro-ICE position, you've received over $200,000 from executives and companies connected to private detention facility operations. That's not classified information. It's in your RFC filings. So here's my question. Did any of those donors ever discuss this report with you? Did anyone ever suggest that having it released to Congresswold be bad for business? The room was completely silent now, except for the sound of reporters typing frantically. Vandrew's face had gone from red to pale. Chairman Jordan looked like he was trying to figure out whether to intervene or let this play out. And Crockett, sensing she had Vander completely cornered, pressed her advantage. Here's what really troubles him. Congressman, this report documented detention facilities were spending $6 per day on food for detainees. $6. That's less than most school lunch programs. And the report found that some contractors were billing the government for $12 per day, while actually spending $6, pocketing the difference. You signed off on findings that showed contractors were literally profiting by keeping detained immigrants on starvation-level food budgets. And now you're on this committee defending those same contractors and attacking anyone who raises concerns about conditions. How do you explain that? Vander finally found his voice, but it came out defensive and weak. The detention system is complex, and isolated issues don't mean. These weren't isolated issues, Crockett interrupted, holding up the thick report. This was a systematic review afterwards of facilities that found problems everywhere investigators looked. Medical neglect, financial fraud, abuse allegations, inadequate food, you name it. And it was all documented, certified, and then buried. And you were part of burying it. She pulled out one more document, and this one seemed to genuinely surprise Vander. This is an internal memo from April of last year. 1 month after you signed the report, it's from the Administrative Oversight Board to the Facility Review Team. And it specifically instructs them to restrict access to the March report pending further review of classification reinstri. And guess who was one of 3 board members who voted for that restriction? You want to see the voter record, Congressman? Because I have it right here. Andrew's microphone suddenly queued out. He'd started to respond, but no sound came through the speakers. For a moment, there was confusion. Was it technical difficulties or something else? Vrew tapped his microphone, looking increasingly flustered, while the committee's technical staff scrambled to fix it. The optics were terrible. It looked like he was being silenced, even though it was almost certainly just a technical glitch. Crockett used the moment perfectly. While we wait for the congressman's microphone to work, let me just note for the record that every document I've referenced today has been submitted to the committee as evidence. The report, the signature page, the voter rec, all of it. This isn't speculation or partisan attack. This is documented fact. A comprehensive abuse report was completed, signed off on by multiple officials, including Congressman Vander, and then deliberately sealed so Congress couldn't see it. That's not proper oversight. That's a cover-up. Vander's microphone came back on, and he immediately jumped heading, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The Congresswoman is engaging in character assassination based on selective reading of complex administrative. Congressman, this is literally your signature, Crockett said. And this time, she actual laud. Not a mean laugh, but the kind-of incredulous laugh that comes from watching someone deny something that's obviously true. I'm not selective evaluating anything. You signed this document. You certified these findings. You voted to restrict congressional lists to it. These are facts. And the reason you're so upset right now isn't because I'm being unfair. It's because I've found the receipts behind Vandrew. Several Republican members were shifting gun comfortably in their seats. Representative Tom McClintock was reading something on his phone with a concerned expression. Representative Kelly Armstrong was whispering to a staffer. Even Chairman Jordan looked at troubled, clearly recognizing that the shot gone beyond normal partisan back and forth into something more serious. Crockett wasn't finished. Let's talk about what this means for the people affected by this cover-up. We're talking about detention facilities where people, including families with children, were being held in conditions that your own signed report described. Inadequate and potentially abusive, where food budgets were so low that it amounted to nutritional neglect, where medical care was so insufficient that detainees with serious health conditions weren't getting treatment. And when a federal review documented all of this, instead of bringing it to Congress so it could fix it, it got sealed and hidden. How many people suffered because this report never reached the people who could have done something about it? She looked directly at Vandrew. You want to talk about getting the bad guys out? Use that phrase all the time. We need to get the bad guys out. We need to secure a border. We need to be tough on illegal immigration. Fine, but what about the bad guys who run facilities, that abuse detainees, and defraud taxpayers? What about the bad guys who pocket money that's supposed to go toward feeding people? Why are you so passionate about catching people crossing the border illegally, but completely silent about contractors stealing from the government and mistreating people in custody? Vandrew tried to pivot to his standard talking points about border security, but Crockett cut him off immediately. We're not talking about border security. We're talking about your signature on a report you now claim doesn't exist. We're talking about your vote to hide that report from Congress. We're talking about your financial connections to the contractors that report criticized. Stay on topic, Congressman. Explain your signature. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Vandrew looked to Chairman Jordan, clearly hoping for some kind of intervention, some procedural ruling that would end this line of questioning. Jordan, recognizing that he had to do something, raised his gavel. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I ask for an additional 2 minutes, Crockett said quickly, using a procedural option that the chair could grant at his discretion. Jordan hesitated. Denying the request would look like he was protecting Vandrew. Granting it would mean more of this devastating questioning. He made a calculation. The gentle lady is granted an additional 2 minutes. Crockett nodded her thanks and turned back to Vandrew. Congressman, let me ask you a direct yes or no question. Did you ever discuss this report or the decision to restrict ingress access to it with any executives or representatives from detention facility contractors? Vandrew's face was now visibly sweating under the hearing room lights. I had many conversations during my time on the oversight board. Yes or no, Congressman? Did contractors discuss this report with you? The Congresswoman is trying to create some conspiracy. Yes or no? Vandrew looked trapped. A yes would confirm that contractors had influenced the cover-up. A no would be easily disproven if Crockett had evidence offset conversations. And her confident question suggested she might. He chose a middle path that satisfied no one. I don't recall specific conversations about specific reports from over a year ago. Crockett smiled. You don't recall. That's convenient. But you also don't deny it. Let me help your memory. Do you recall meeting with representatives from Core Civic, one of the largest detention facility contractors? On April 15th of last year, that's 2 weeks after you signed their report and 1 week after you voted to restrict it. Do you recall that meeting? Vandrew looked genuinely shocked that she had this information. I meet with many constituents and stakeholders. Core Civic isn't your constituent. Congressman, they're a Nashville bust corp, but they did donate $50,000 to your campaign 3 weeks after that meeting. Does that help your memory? The murmuring behind Vandrew had grown loud enough that Jordan had to gavel for order. Several Republican members looked genuinely shocked, clearly not having canned about this connection. Vandrew opened his mouth, closed it, and then made a decision that would become Thestory's defining moment. "Mr. Chairman, I move for an emergency recess." The room exploded. An emergency recess is almost never called during member questioning. It's a dramatic step that suggests something has gone seriously wrong. Jordan looked stunned by the request. Crockett's expression was pure vindication, and Vandrew looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else. "Mr. Chairman, I object to the recess," Crockett said immediately. The congressman called for transparency in immigration enforcement. "I'm privileged. If he has explanations for these documents, now is the time to give them." Jordan was trapped. Granting the recess would look like a cover-up. Denying it would mean forcing Vandrew to continue answering questions. He clearly couldn't tense her without making things worse. After a long pause, he made his decision. The committee will take a 15-minute recess. As members stood and started filing out, Crockett remained seated. Documents spread before her, looking directly at the cameras that were still recording. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The image of her sitting calmly while chaos erupted around her, while Vandrew rushed out of the room, while staffers scrambled on other members, whispered urgently, said everything. During the recess, reporters mobbed Crockett in the hallway outside the committee room. She gave them the soundbite she'd been preparing. "Today, we learned that a comprehensive report documenting abusing fraud at detention facilities was completed, certified, and then deliberately hidden from Congress. We learned that one of the people who helped hide it now sits on this committee and has received substantial campaign contributions from the contractors that report criticized. And learned that when confronted with his own signature, Congressman Vandrew Calden explained his actions and had to call an emergency recess. The American people deserve better. I'll wait for him to provide real answers. The American people are watching." When the hearing convened, Vandrew was notably absent. His staff claimed he'd been called to an urgent meeting with leadership. Chairman Jordan announced that the committee would continue with other scheduled witnesses, and that Vandrew's questioning would be addressed at a later time. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Vandrew wasn't coming back to face more questions today, but the damage was done. By evening, Vandrew's emergency recess was trending on social media. News outlets were pulling campaign finance records showing his contributions from detention contracts. Investigative reporters were filing FOIA requests for the full report. Crockett had referenced and good government groups were calling for an inspector general investigation into who decided to seal the report and why. Vandrew released a statement that night claiming Crockett had ambushed him without of context documents and that he'd happy to address the substance once had time to review the materials properly. It was a damage control response that convinced no one, especially since he'd signed the original report and had 18 months to review it. The really significant event came 3 days later, when House Inspector General announced that he'd opened an investigation into irregularities in the administrative handling of oversight reports related to detention facility conditions. It wasn't a direct result of Crockett's question, officially at least. Butavarian knew the connection. Her public confrontation had made it impossible for the issue to be quietly ignored. In a follow-up interview with MSNBC, Crockett explained why the Vandrew confrontation mattered beyond just one congressman's hypocrisy. "This is about a pattern we keep seeing where people in power hide information that might be politically inconvenient, whether it's abuse reports, financial audits, or policy reviews. If the findings don't support the narrative they want to tell, they seal it and hope nobody notices. Well, I noticed, and I'm going to keep noticing, because oversight means actually looking at what's being hidden, not just what's being shown. A constituent back in her Dallas district, himself an immigrant who had been detained for 3 months while his asylum case was processed, came to her next town hall specifically to thank her. The conditions I experienced inadequate food, no real medical care. Guards hot-treated us like animals. I tried to tell people, but nobody cared. Seeing Yo hold them accountable for hiding reports about exactly what I went through, that meant everything. Thank you for not letting them bury the truth. Not meant more than any of the viral clips or news coverage, reminded Crockett with confrontation had been worth it. The documents and signatures and time limited, not because they embarrass it, Don Congressman, but because they are presented real harm to real people thought powerful interests had tried to hide. If this deep dive into how Jasmine Crockett used a congressman's own signature to expose a detention, abuse cover-up showed you how oversight is supposed to work. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about the moments when accountability actually happens. Drop a comment telling us what sealed government reports you think need to be released. And share this with Anyan, who believes that transparency shall depend on whether the findings are politically convenient. Your engagement helps us keep following these stories until the full truth comes out. Retry Claude can make mistakes.